Hey everyone, my name's Leslie from Books, Gurs, and Purrs. Today I'm going to be talking about A Vile Hunger for a Hammering Heart, Episode 5 of Interview the Vampire. Before we continue, if you haven't seen the episode, don't watch this. And also, if you haven't read the books, don't watch this. This is really just me fangirling out about the books and the show, and I talk about both. So if you don't want to be spoiled about how the show is potentially moving forward or anything like that, don't watch this. All right, so to continue, I also just want to say that last night, around 7 o'clock, Michael from Black Gay Comic Geek had a live session. And so I joined it because this episode had me so distraught. And I was just really glad that he was doing a live event, so that I could just like commune with other people that were trying to have some sort of makeshift therapy session over what happened. So it was really nice. You're going to want to enjoy joining that live session he has, I think, every week after the episode, like around 7. 7 o'clock was the one last night. So the show opens up to Daniel Malloy and Louis in Dubai. So it's another interview session. But what's going on is that Danielle Malloy is going through Claudia's journals. And Louis is just having a grand old time eating or drinking Rashid's blood. And it's not a typical moment where he's just kind of drinking for sustenance and shooing some along. He's actually, both of them, Rashid and Louis, are clearly enjoying this encounter. And so I almost feel like that makes Daniel feel a little bit uncomfortable, like he's seeing something that's a bit intimate in a way. Anyway, so that was something to point out about Rashid and Luis's relationship. You know, what is their dynamic really? And so then we move forward into the past. Luis and Lestat are at home. Claudia has been MIA, but she's still there, but they haven't seen her. And it's been going on for months. And they decide to invade her privacy, being the parents that they are, read her diaries, and they just wait for Claudia to show up, ambush her, admit that they've read her diaries because they're concerned, but it's like such an invasion of privacy. And Claudia confesses that she has been murdering people, but she's been doing this on her own, and so she has not been properly disposing of the bodies. She buried bodies in an actual very shallow area, and so when a storm comes, the bodies will rise. So that's a big concern because she's really just gone rogue and hasn't followed the rules, which basically just puts them all in danger to be exposed. So here they are concerned about how do we manage this situation? And the next scene is at a bar. And I want to say it's Tim. The actor, I think, is the same guy that they used to do business with. Tim wants to be, he wants to run for Louisiana House of Representatives and is hitting him up for cash. But this scene is also about keeping their attention away from their home so that the police could raid their home. And so by the time they figure this out, they take off, they go home, and Claudia's there with the police, and she's just in a giggle fest. And they're just trying their best to manage the situation. They're trying to see what's going on in their home. At this point, I guess it's illegal. Same-sex relationships are illegal. And if they're raiding their home, they're going to see that they have one bed. And Claudia seems inebriated. On top of that, they find the incinerator. So there's just all these red flags going off, and they're just trying to manage them. This also reveals that Claudia has been keeping body parts as souvenirs, which is also evidence, right? And they could easily be found out. So while this whole raid is going on at home, it's terrible, it's horrifying, but there is an element of these scenes being funny, because it's so like horrendous and ridiculous all at the same time that it really I don't know, it was bizarre. It was bizarre to say the least. So by the end of it, they come out unscathed, uncaught. The cops are going to leave, but they are making it very clear that they're keeping an eye on them and also threaten them, because being in a same-sex partnership is illegal. Luis and Lestat completely team up on Claudia and get so angry at her over what she's doing. But it's like they're all in the wrong. What she's doing is wrong, but she's throwing back at them about all the problems she has because she's staying the same age. And Lestat is his apathetic self, and is cruel on top of that. He just has a way of knowing how to push Claudia's buttons or just say real cruel things rather than take any responsibility for at least how she feels, you know. So much could be solved if they were willing to humble themselves and be like, I'm sorry, let's figure something out. But no, that's not what's going to happen. And because of this, Claudia finally exposes Lestat for the hypocrite that he is, and points out the fact that he's still with Antoinette, which just the other episode he said that he was going to stop seeing. So it's been, has it been years? It's been a while. It's been a while since he said he was going to stop seeing Antoinette, but this whole time he's been sneaking out and having a grand old time with his singer lover. And it's that's such a great scene, because it was a moment that felt really nice that Lestat shushed. She got him real quiet. For all the nasty things that he said, he didn't have nothing to say because it's finally caught. After that, Claudia takes off. She packs her bag and really just wants them to reflect on what they did to her. Then the scene cuts to Dubai, and I feel like there's this conversation going on between Daniel and Louis that's almost like a, I don't want to say meta conversation. I don't know the right word, but Daniel tells Louis that her character is something that Louis has to be okay with being out there in the world, because once Claudia is written about, Louis will have no control over how the world perceives her. You know, she will now become like this public entity. And so I think that's something that he's trying to make really clear for Louise to understand. But I wonder if that's kind of more of, like I said, a meta conversation about Anne Rice writing the character and what others, or how the character is perceived once she put Interview with a Vampire out into the world. That's what kind of like reminded me of that. And I don't know if that's true, but that was definitely on my mind while I was watching it. So back in the past, Lestat and Louis are letting time pass. It's about 7 years, and this is around the time of the Great Depression. So not only is their home in shambles, but so was the world, so was the outside world. No one's in a really good place. And so Louis just really finds himself feeling miserable, and instead of trying to adjust and move on with his life, because ultimately Claudia left and he has no control over what she does in the outside world, but he does have control over the self, and he just decides to stay home and mope and take out his anger and feelings out on Lestat, which actually what he did before Claudia even came along. Just anything that he was upset about in his life, he really did take out on Lestat, and so they kind of revert back to these old and new wounds and old behaviors. Now, during this time, Claudia ventures out. She goes through the circuit of colleges to just gain new knowledge and trying to figure out about any vampire lore of the sorts, which I did like because they did do it in the book. I think they just did it kind of different, I think. Very subtly different, but it's not a big deal. But I did like that this character is able to venture out into the world and get experiences with other people and just show like a different type of growth for her character. But as that happens, she meets another vampire and she thinks she could befriend them, but ultimately they assault her, and from there I think it just hits her how vulnerable of a position that she's in, and unfortunately, because she was made at such a young age, she doesn't really have the capacity to protect herself. Even in the vampire world, she's there's really no competition between her and any other vampire. Her body and her power mixed together, she's just too weak. So she goes back home to Lestat, and oh, actually, before I say that, it cuts away to Dubai first, where Daniel Malloy pushes for more information about what happened to Claudia. And the way that the show shot it was that we have an understanding of what happened to her, we don't see it. And I appreciated that they did that. There's no reason to, show that or like re-traumatize anybody that's ever been through that. And I also think this is another moment of the interview that also feels like a meta conversation, because here's a journalist pushing for more details, and Louis doesn't want to give it because he doesn't want Claudia to be exploited. And I think I respect that. And I feel like Daniel's character does, he's a journalist, but I feel like he represents part of the viewers that maybe would want to see those details or want to have like more of a greater understanding. And so I feel like that's like the dialogue that's happening. And I appreciated it that Louis' character is really taking a stand and like, hey, don't go there. It's clear what happened. You don't need it anymore. That's something that I really appreciated. But in doing so, we see that this is a moment that Louis and Daniel really push each other's buttons, and they're pushing each other's boundaries. And I think this would be like the second time. The first time is Louis is eating in front of him, but I feel like that's like a blur of boundaries as well, because it's like, this is clearly a different intimate moment that maybe he shouldn't be having in front of Daniel. And in this scene where they're talking, it's about Daniel pushing him for something more that he's not comfortable with, and Luis is pushing him by mentally controlling him and slapping his hand up and down, like just pushing his buttons. And so because of that, Daniel walks up and slaps Luis across the face. And I actually felt like proud of his character, not that I'm condoning violence, but I felt like it's him they're both asserting boundaries like in a different volatile way, and it was just very striking. And I also feel like Daniel does this because on some level he knows this second interview is different, and I think he's under the impression that he's not gonna die, not this time, especially since Louis wants this story to be told so badly. so much so that he took this journalist that lives somewhere else and flew them to Dubai to get the information, you know. I think he knows that what kind of power, in a way, he has in the dynamic. So moving along, the scene goes back home to Luis and Lestat, where Luis is still obsessed with finding Claudia, and we see that Lestat still is continuing a relationship with Antoinette, but it's coming from a place of him feeling neglected, him feeling like, hey, I'm the one that stayed. I didn't leave you. I'm staying here. I love you, and you still are so disconnected and won't engage in this family that's in front of you. So he takes off with Antoinette. Luis meets his sister in a cemetery so she could say goodbye, but in doing so, we also see that Luis has a tombstone of his own that his sister has left there, and this is truly her saying goodbye, because since it's the Great Depression and things are bad, she decides to leave with her family, which is probably the best thing she could have done, not just for her family because of the financial crisis, but because Luis is not a good person to be around, since he's a vampire and he has a very complicated relationship with Lestat. So the last thing she wants to do, unbeknownst to her, is put herself in harm's way. As this happens, it turns out that Claudia was stalking Lestat and Luis. She's been watching them, and so she realizes that the reason why she was made was to be family for Louis, because his family has disconnected from him. So Claudia shows up on the doorstep. She comes home and she confronts Luis and Lestat. She says she's just going to stop by, but really what she's there for is to collect Luis. She sees that she's meant to be his sister and they're leaving this toxic relationship with Lestat. I think Lestat can see that when Claudia proposes this, I mean, it's a real thought on his mind that he would take off with Claudia. And this upsets Lestat because, according to Lestat, he's so in love with Louis and he's just been waiting and waiting for him to come back to him away. You know, they're physically in the same space, but he's not really in the relationship. And so that upsets him. The fact that Claudia could just leave for years, pop in, and then he's just ready to go. So they have the row of a lifetime. This is like the moment that was so unsettling, and it wasn't because of any particular violence, because it was really violent. Lestat and Louis just really physically fight each other, and most of it is like off screen in a way. Something else I appreciated, but the moment that struck me the hardest was Claudia runs up the stairs and she slides down to the ground and she sees like there's a bit of cracked mirror and she sees her reflection, and you could hear Louis in another room when the fight has quieted, and he's trying to comfort Claudia from another room and say, it's okay, you know, it'll be okay. But as he's saying it's gonna be okay, she sees blood streaming down her forehead. So it's a really nice juxtaposition between him saying what's going to be okay and her knowing, quite literally in a mirror, that it's not going to be okay. And that just really touched me. It made me so emotional, because that felt like a very real moment for anyone that's experienced domestic violence, of just a parent wanting to protect their kid. And so it's almost like an instinct, right, to be like, it'll be okay, even though it's clearly not. Like everything is saying and showing it's not going to be okay, but it's more out of a protection. And it was just like a gut instinct moment that felt too real. The episode ends there, and it was so jarring. I don't really have any questions about this particular episode. It was just so, yeah, I don't have any other words for it other than jarring. I usually try to pay attention to interior design or little tips to the hat to the books and whatnot. But this show, this particular episode, all that went out the window. It was just incredibly engaging, fraught, and yeah. So let me know what you think below. I don't have anything else to add. I really wish I did, but it was a lot. It was a lot. Like Louis called Lestat, it was a lot. Oh, you know what? Also, you know what? You'll see it. It was very violent and some other things happened. But that's basically the summary of it. Let me know what you think about this episode. It's something that made me feel like, oh, I need to give myself some TLC after this. I'm trying to think about anything else I have to add to the conversation about this episode. The only thing I could think of is that I don't think Luis and Lestat really had any type of physical, violent type fight between each other in the books. And I do think this added a layer of empathy for Luis, so that any viewers that are watching the show that haven't read the books, they'll have more of I don't know, an empathy, or taking Luis and Claudia's side about why they're going to want to leave Lestat in the next couple of episodes, right? I think there's only going to be 7 episodes. So this is episode 5. And also, since in the books, Claudia commits such an act of violence towards Lestat for them to get away, I felt like maybe they wanted it to be like on equal ground. Yeah, that's all I could think of. So I really wish those scenes hadn't happened. It was just, it was painful. Yeah, there was a lot going on just in this one episode. It was explosive. All right, now I really will end it. So like, subscribe, comment below. I'd love to chat about the episode because it helps the healing process of what happened. Yeah, that's it. And I guess I'll see you later.